video has given you a little bit of an insight into this topic. I'm now going to move on to sensitive periods of motor development, which will feature and expand on what we've discussed in terms of the brain and learning. So key things to remember: during early and middle childhood, so from sort of 2 to 8, this is a very sensitive period and is a limited time period in development when the effect of specific experiences on the brain is particularly strong. A great example of the sensitive period has to do with maybe learning a second language. So at an early age, starting to train results in greater language proficiency in later life. So you may know people who grew up speaking a second language in their home as a child, and this language development was much easier for them to try to acquire that second language maybe when they get to high school or college level. This really demonstrates this kind of key period, sponge period, where children are developing those learning or that mental capacity. And this example is true of learning in sports skills. So that period of 2 to 8 is really key in terms of crucial point for developing those key motor skills. So sensitive periods are also referred to as optimal readiness periods. And this important time of motor skill development is sometimes referred to as the critical period. However, some neuroscientists view this critical period as a highly restricted time period when appropriate simulation experiences are required for normal development of the brain and behaviour. Critical in this sense means that its important functions cannot be acquired outside a specific developmental window. So we've got a window where we're really going to make sure we've got these key skills developed. The development of vision is an example of this, to put it into context, something that occurs during a critical period. So, unless an infant sees light during its first 6 months of life, the nerves leading from the eye to the visual cortex of the brain, which processes signals, will degenerate and die. So that is a critical period of development of sight. Most critical periods are under genetic control, as with the development of vision, while sensitive periods have more flexible time frames and strongly influenced by experience. So obviously there's some key research and references you can see within this discussion of sensitive periods. So motor skill development, I would probably align more to a sensitive period rather than a critical. So expanding on from this, sensitive periods is a term most applicable to the importance of developing fundamental motor skills such as, hand-eye coordination, eye-foot coordination, body control, fine motor skills and other similar skill-related building blocks during that early and middle childhood years. So it's a sensitive period. Sensitive periods of skill development may also be brought of as optimal readiness periods, meaning that the child's optimally ready to learn a particular skill. So when we move on to look at motor skill development, I'm going to actually go into more detail, defining and discussing key research linked to these sensitive periods of optimal readiness periods of sports skills. Skills learned during this time are learned more easily and with less training, and typically leads to greater proficiency in adolescence and adulthood. So this emphasis on making sure that we're developing key motor skills with young children is crucial. However, we can't definitively state that motor skills will never be learned, if not learned, in this sensitive period. What we can state is it's, is the best and most fertile and easiest time to learn these skills, and the time that the window of opportunity is most wide and open. So it's much harder to develop these skills later in life, and basically the answer to this lies in how our brains develop. I'm not going to go into huge detail around brain development, but it will be discussed a little further. So focusing on those windows of opportunity of critical or sensitive periods of development, the movement early brain development, you can see of gross motor skills, between optimal point from 2 to 5, and obviously you can see key periods of from birth to 9 years of fine motor skills. So it's around when are we actually honing in on key skills that they're going to need to take part in sport. As I said, we're going to look at these windows of opportunity when we move on to the session on fundamental movement skills. We've already touched on how the brain works, and that the MRI scans and the neural capacity of the brain and the wiring of the brain as the children learn and progress. Now I'm going to kind of hone on this in a little bit more detail, aligned to this sensitive period of motor development. So the neural wiring and early brain development, okay, so the brain development or learning is actually the process of creating and strengthening, discarding synapses or connections between neurons. So basically, the synapses organise the brain by forming pathways that connect parts of the brain that control everything that we do. Brain development is activity dependent, meaning that those synapses that are formed and consistently used over time are strengthened. Okay, so this is where in sport we use repetition of practice to strengthen those synapses and learning. While those that are not used are pruned away by the brain because they're not seen as needed. So if a child takes part in a certain sport for a short period of time, they may develop some learning, but often these are pruned away if the skills aren't used again. So this pruning may sound harsh, but it's actually essential for part of healthy brain development, which basically streamlines the child's neural processing and makes remaining circuit work more quickly and efficiently. Pruning or selection of active neural circuits takes place throughout life, but is far more commonly seen in early childhood. So because if you think about it, their brain at that point is taking on so much information and learning, and through that kind of key stage of development, that obviously some pruning is going to occur. So multiple experiences in physical activity and motor skill practice early in a child's life are important to wire their brains in a way that facilitates their athletic development. So if they've developed these motor skills in early practice, then their brains are developed to facilitate future development and involvement in sport and for them to become athletes. The main window of opportunity for development of gross and fine motor skills is between 1 and 9 years, which was demonstrated on the diagram I've just shown to you. As generally the window for most motor functions narrows considerably around the age of 10. As discussed, the window does not completely shut, as in like a critical period as we refer to the eyes, but it narrows, thus making it more challenging to develop these basic motor skills at a later age. So this is where our optimal time to learn is crucial. So we've looked at kind of this pruning and of the synapses, but another important process in the development of the brain is the myelination process. So myelin is the white fatty tissue that insulates nerve fibres in the brain to ensure clear transmission across synapses. So young children who process information more slowly because their brains lack this myelin necessary for fast, clear nerve impulse transmission. So the thicker the myelin gets, the better it insulates and the faster and more accurately the signals that control the movement and travel. So I guess the question you're asking yourself at this point as a coach, if thicker myelin increases that nerve reaction, which increases the speed of thought process and movement, how do we actually increase our myelin? So experience and practice with repetition basically are the ways that thicken the myelin sheath for activity. Okay, they build more insulation and thus, as a result of that, more precision, skill and speed. Although some myelin is genetically developed, myelination is for kind of key motor or sport skills is dependent on activity. Okay, so the clear message, some of the stuff I'm going over is quite physiologically based, but the important message you should be taking out of this is what can you be doing as someone working in sport or working as a coach to ensure that children are developing these key motor skills through their synapses and wiring of the brain, but then also what can we do as a coach to ensure the speed of movement and understanding of that movement and control of that movement and travel is developed further. And experience and practice and repetition are these key things, and as coaches and people working in sport, we can ensure our athletes and performers obtain this. So we've discussed the importance of the child developing this myelin. So again, as mentioned from the kind of previous example, adults still can develop key skills, but it's a lot more difficult, and this still it applies to this development of myelin. So adults can still develop the myelin throughout life, but it takes a lot more effort and it happens a lot slower than when you're a child. So this obviously highlights the importance of us working with children and youth in terms of how we develop programs, how we coach and how we work them to ensure that we're developing these processes in the brain. So overall, the developing brain first creates connection synapses that control the execution of motor skills. But by actively engaging in different fundamental motor skills and sport skills, what we're actually doing is within those children's brains, we're increasing their efficiency or increasing the wiredness of that brain, so to speak. And then through continued sport-specific development and repetitive practice, young athletes produce more myelin to turbocharge and again increase the efficiency of their brain in terms of motor skill development. So the optimal time for wiring this turbocharging process is in early to middle childhood. Although we retain some brain plasticity throughout our lives, the most sensitive period for the brain and wiring the brain is for sport is through childhood. To supplement this discussion of examples of the development of the brain and myelin and the importance of how we work and coach, there's a following kind of link which you can access, which goes into a more detailed explanation of this process. And you can find this within this sessions folder.